Hello, this is Eric White. In this screencast, I'm going to give an overview of all of the important Open XML WordprocessingML parts. As you know, Open XML documents are packages that are comprised of parts, and there's a whole variety of types of parts. There's the main document part, there is the comments part, image parts, styles part, etc. I'm going to go at the 30,000 foot level, do an overview of all of these parts and how they're related to each other, and give an explanation of what each part is for. Let's create a little document. I'll insert a little bit of text in there. I'll be using the Open XML Package Editor Power Tool for Visual Studio 2010. This is the most convenient way to go in and look at all of these parts and see how they are related to each other and so on. First and foremost, of course, when talking about an Open XML Word Processing ML document is the main document part. This contains the actual content of the document. In many cases, this might be the only part that you are concerned with if you're just extracting the contents of a document, or if you are creating a new document, you might already have your header parts, footer parts, styles parts, everything else is set up exactly as you want it to be. And in the document generation process, you're only concerned with creating the main document part. The main document part is one of 5 varieties of parts that I term as content parts. These 5 varieties of parts are the main document part, header parts, footer parts, the endnotes part, and the footnotes part. And all of these have a few things in common. First of all of these parts can contain tracked revisions, and they are the only parts that can contain tracked revisions. All of these parts can contain artifacts such as content controls, images, smart art, drawings, and so on. Let's add a header and a footer. And I'm going to indicate that there is a different first page and there are different odd and even pages. And when I do that, it gives me a new header for the first page. So there's the first page header. And I'll have to add new pages. Here's the even page header and the odd page header and odd page footer. Those are termed the default header and footer. If you have only a single header and footer for all pages in a section, then it's the default page header, and that will be the odd page header and footer parts if you are using a different header for even pages. And just for fun, let's add an endnote and a footnote. Now we have an endnote and a footnote, and let's save it. And now if we look at it, the document in the Open XML Package Editor Power Tool, we can see the headers, we can see the footers, we can see the endnotes, and we can see the footnotes. And these comprise all of the content parts. When writing particular code, I often need to process just this set of parts. So in the Open XML Power Tools, I have an extension method that operates on word processing document that returns all of the content parts for a document. I found that I was writing this little bit of code to look at the main document part, look at all the header parts, look at all the footer parts, look at the endnotes part, and look at the footnotes part. So here's the key point. There's one main document part. There are multiple header parts. There are multiple footer parts, possibly. And there's only one endnotes part, and there's only one footnotes part. With the header parts and the footer parts, using the Open XML SDK, you get back a collection, and if this collection has any items in the collection, then that's how you can iterate through all the header parts or all the footer parts. And in the Open XML SDK, when you look at the endnotes part or the footnotes part, if that particular property returns null, then that means there are no endnotes or there are no footnotes, respectively. Another key point about this is that these parts contain the information that will be visible to the end user or to the person viewing the document. So, for instance, if you have a program that enforces certain policies in your company, that certain naughty words should not be in the document, and you have a policy check program that looks for such words, then you would want to look through all of the content parts. Let's go in and add a comment to our document here. And now we can see that there is a comments.xml. We can see that there is a relationship from the main document part to the comments.xml part. One key point is that certain relationships are implicit relationships and certain relationships are explicit relationships. So, for example, the relationship from the main document part to the comments part, that's an implicit relationship. And the relationship from the main document part to the header parts and footer parts, that's an explicit relationship. And what that means, if I go into document.xml and I go look at the section properties, then I can see these header reference elements and footer reference elements, and I can also see this attribute r:id, and it has a relationship ID in those attributes. And if I look at that header reference, I see RID9, and I can come over here and I can pull up the properties. There's RID13 for that header. There's RID10 for that header, and for header 1, it has RID9. So this is an explicit relationship. In other words, there needs to be an RID in the markup of the main document part, and to get to that related part, you have to get the RID from the markup in the main document part, look up the relationship by its RID, and then once you have that relationship, you can determine the target of that relationship and open up that target part. In contrast, the relationship from the main document part to the comments part is an implicit relationship. If I come over here and look at the properties for that relationship to the comments part, you'll see that there is an ID, a relationship ID of RID8, but you will not find that RID8 anywhere in the markup for the main document part. It's an implicit relationship, meaning that a consumer of this document, if the consumer wants to look at the comments, what it does is it looks for a relationship with a particular relationship type, and it is this relationship type right here as defined in the Open XML standard. And if it finds such a relationship, it can then open up the comments part. There will be only one. And if there is no relationship with that particular relationship type, then there aren't any comments in the document. Here I'll insert an image of the slide that I used for the start of this screencast. And now we can see this relationship from the document.xml, in other words, from the main document part to this image1.tmp. The name doesn't really matter. What does matter is that it has this particular relationship type here. This is the image relationship type. And then if I go look at that part over here, I will see over here that the content type is image/PNG. So it doesn't matter what the part name is. What matters is what is the content type in the properties for that particular part, and that tells me that it's a PNG. It might tell me that it's a GIF. It might tell me that it's a JPEG or what have you. So what we've talked about so far is the main document part, all the other content parts, the comments part, and the image parts. Of course, the relationship from the main document part to the image parts, that's an explicit relationship. Next to examine is this styles part. We don't really care about these latent styles, but what we see that is of interest in this styles part are the doc defaults. In assembling the fonts and in assembling the styling for any piece of text, this is the ultimate authority for that styling. If nothing else specifies that before this point, then this takes effect. In other words, you can override the styling for a particular piece of text. You can put styling on in a style, in a named style, which we're going to look at in just a second. And then finally, if there is no styling applied through any of those means, then these doc defaults take effect. And down here we can see a paragraph style, normal. We can see a character style, and we can see a table style. I'm not going to get into all of the nuts and bolts of these varieties of styles. I've covered that in other screencasts. There's a lot to learn about styles. Styles inherit from other styles. Table styles in particular are pretty involved. They're very powerful. Now, if we also go back here and we look at, there's this styles with effects part, and this part is there for backwards compatibility. So the situation could be that you have a document that uses effects that are not supported in previous versions of Word or some other word processor. So let's say that you use some effect like reflection. If you edit this document in a word processor that doesn't understand what reflection is, and then you write this document back out, that word processor is obviously not going to write out your markup for reflection. But what it can do is, when the document is written, it saves all of the styles in two parts. One is the styles part, and the other is the styles with effect part. And when you open up that document again in a more recent version of the word processor that understands that particular styling of reflection, then the word processor has the capability to rehydrate those styles in the main document part and make them reflect the various attributes that are in the styles with effects part. It's just a way to store away those fancy styles if you need to edit this document in a down-level word processor. You can find a screencast that goes through the styles with effects part at this location. Let's number some paragraphs here. There we got some paragraphs that are numbered. And now we will see a numbering definition part. If we look in the main document part, we'll find these paragraphs that have this numpr element that have a num ID as a child element, and we could go find information about this particular variety of numbering in the numberings part that had a num ID of 1. That points to an abstract num ID of 0, and this abstract num ID of 0, this defines the actual numbering of that particular numbered list. There is a screencast that discusses this in depth. You can find that screencast at this location. And there is an article on MSDN that discusses the numbering markup in very great depth. If you need to know all the ins and outs of numbering, you can find that MSDN article at this location. Another part that you will find yourself needing to get at somewhat often is the settings part. This settings part has various properties such as revision tracking. Here I'm going to turn on revision tracking, and now we can see that revision tracking has been turned on with this track revisions element. Also, if you protect this document for editing, that information will be stored in this part. There are compatibility settings here. Those are the main interesting parts in this settings part. Another interesting part is the alt chunk part. This is a part that enables transformation of content of a whole variety of formats to canonical word processing ML. Here is a little document that has an alt chunk part. The alt chunk part is this afchunk.dat part up here. If I look here, I see that there is a relationship from the main document part to that afchunk.dat part. If I look in the main document part, I'll find this interesting little markup right here, this alt chunk element, and this alt chunk element has a relationship ID of alt chunk ID 1. And if I look at the relationship here, sure enough, it has a relationship ID of alt chunk ID 1, and it has this particular relationship type of AF chunk. And if I look at this afchunk.dat, I can see it has a content type of application/XHTML plus XML. This is defined in the standard. It indicates that this afchunk.dat contains a little bit of HTML. If I export this, I'm going to edit that with an editor, and we can see a little bit of HTML. It has an H1 heading, and it has a paragraph. This is an HTML document. And the interesting thing about this document is that if I open it, what I see is I see the content that was in the document up here, and I also see the HTML heading and the HTML paragraph. And if I make a little change so that when I save this document, it'll actually do the save, when I look at the document again, that AF chunk part, that alternate format chunk part is gone. And if I were to look in the markup for the main document part, I would also see that that alt chunk element is gone. And it's been replaced with standard Open XML WordprocessingML markup. There are a lot of formats that you have available to use when you are importing content using alt chunk. You can find at this blog post a list of all of those formats. And further, there is a screencast at this location that walks through a lot of the details of alt chunk. Another part that you will deal with fairly often when you are making sophisticated and interesting OpenXML applications is this custom XML part. This custom XML part can contain all kinds of interesting information. It can contain any XML that you like. You can have as many of these custom XML parts as you like, and you can put XML in there of any variety that you want to. One of the important uses of custom XML is that you can put content controls in your main document part, and you can specify an XPath expression in that content control such that the content control is populated with data from that custom XML part. The way that happens also is in the main document part, in that content control, there will be a GUID, and that GUID will match up to the GUID that is in this item props1.xml. This is how the relationship is created between the main document part and that custom XML part. So if you have multiple custom XML parts, and if you are using those custom XML parts for data binding, then you use the GUID and you effectively have an explicit relationship. If you just have all kinds of metadata that you need to store with the document and you put it in your custom XML part so that that data will be carried along with the Word document, then you would use the equivalent of an implicit relationship to that part. With that, I have covered all of the parts that I regularly deal with. There are a few other parts that I'm going to touch on lightly here. First of all is the theme part. We can see that the main document part has a relationship to the theme part, and if I open up the theme part, then I'll see that this theme has a particular name, the Office theme, and there are theme elements and there are colors specified for various aspects of this theme. You only are ever interested in this theme part if you are rendering an Open XML document. That is the only scenario that so far I've ever encountered where I was interested in the theme part. There may be other scenarios. Maybe if you're generating documents, you may automatically include a certain theme if you want to. And if you are generating documents where different documents might have a different theme, then you might be concerned with this theme part. Generally, when you're generating a whole bunch of documents, every document typically will have the same theme, so you can set up your template document with the theme that you want and then forget about it. I'm going to insert a content control in this document just so you can see one more thing. Now, because I have inserted this content control, this document has a glossary part. If you look under the glossary folder, you'll see that it kind of contains effectively everything that you have in a WordprocessingML document. There's the main document part of the glossary part. There are settings, there are styles with effects, web settings, and so on. There are two things that are stored in this glossary main document part. One is the default content of a content control when you insert a content control and before you've actually added any text to it. That's stored in this glossary part. Another thing that's stored in the glossary part are the contents for quick parts. Quick parts are a way whereby in a word processing document you can set up some standard things that you want to insert into a document, some boilerplate text that you want to insert more than once, and that content goes into the glossary part if you use it. As Open XML consumers and as Open XML producers, we aren't very concerned with this glossary part. I've actually never had occasion to use it till now. We can also see these properties parts up here. There's the core file properties part and the extended file properties part. This core file properties part is this core.xml. And what we'll find in this part are various name value pairs that define metadata about this document. One key point is that these core properties, the layout or the vocabulary of this particular part is shared amongst all of the varieties of OpenXML files. In other words, a spreadsheet also has the same core properties part and a presentation also has the same core properties part. And the extended file properties part, this contains name value pairs for things that are application specific. So this particular one shows only properties that are relevant to WordprocessingML. We can also see this font table part. The font table part lists all of the fonts that are used in this document, and also one more thing that it can do is it can contain imported fonts. So if you're using a non-standard font in this document and you need to embed that font in this document, this is where that font will be. I've only ever used this part in my WordprocessingML applications where I needed to validate that a particular font either is a standard font and is referred to in this font table part, or that that particular font is embedded in the font table part. It's possible to construct an OpenXML document that uses a custom font that is installed on your system and not embed that custom font in the document. And then if you give this document to someone else, Word will make its best attempt to use a good font for that content, but you're not guaranteed at all what you are going to get in that scenario. It'll be mapped to some other arbitrary font as best as Word can. There are some very specific rules about how that mapping occurs. It's not particularly important. If I want to make sure that a particular document is going to render absolutely correctly, then I will check to make sure that all fonts are either standard fonts or that all fonts in that document are embedded in the font table part. Another part to discuss is this web settings part. This web settings part is relevant if you are using Word to edit HTML. So in other words, you can use Word, you can open up an HTML document, you can look at the HTML and you can resave it, and some of the aspects of that HTML that cannot be represented in WordprocessingML will be saved away in this web settings part so that when you resave as HTML, you get a good round trip of your HTML. Further, when you import content from an alt chunk part that contains HTML, the resulting content, after it's been converted to canonical WordprocessingML, will also use the web settings part. Other than that, it's not very important. I've really rarely had to actually do much with the web settings part. There are three other varieties of parts that I'm going to touch on very lightly here. There are MailMerge parts, there's frame sets and frames, and master documents and sub-documents. The MailMerge parts contain the information that is set up when you use Word to do a mail merge. So when you use Word to do a mail merge, you import some data source and you are mapping that data source into particular fields in the document, and then you do a generation of all of the documents from that mail merge information. And the information to do that mail merge are stored in the MailMerge parts. Now, a misconception that some people have had is that those MailMerge parts and that MailMerge markup means that somehow the Open XML SDK is going to help you do a mail merge, and it doesn't. You can use the Open XML SDK to set up your mail merge, but then you still have to use the Word client to actually do the mail merging. Further, mail merge is one aspect of doing document generation, and really that's what Open XML is all about, is the means to generate all kinds of documents without involving the Word client. So it really doesn't make sense from an OpenXML developer's point of view to use these MailMerge parts. I've never used them in my career as an OpenXML developer. Then frame sets and frames and master documents and sub-documents are also document composition techniques. OpenXML is also all about document composition. Document Builder is a way to compose a new document from a variety of other OpenXML documents, and it doesn't involve the Word client. It happens all just in OpenXML, so it happens extremely fast. You can find more about Document Builder at the Document Builder Resource Center on openxmldeveloper.org. So I've never used in my career as an OpenXML developer the MailMerge parts, the frame sets and frames, which are also a document composition approach, and master documents and sub-documents, which are also a document composition approach. In this screencast, I've talked about a lot of the parts that I deal with on a daily basis. These are the main document parts, all of the various content parts, including header parts, footer parts, endnotes parts, footnotes parts, the comments part, the image parts, styles parts, numbering part, document settings, alt chunk, and custom XML. Those are the main parts that I use on a regular basis for many scenarios as an OpenXML developer. And then there are the varieties of parts that are much less used: the theme part, the glossary part, the various properties parts, the font table, web settings parts, and then I never use the MailMerge frame sets and frames and master documents and sub documents parts. That's all I'm going to cover in this video. Thanks for watching.